welcome to Stone Upon Stone, episode 11. Talked last time about how we can have peace through taking responsibility for our actions. This time I would like to talk about what makes a good choice. One of the first things that makes a good choice, and is a pretty good baseline all around, is that good choices tend to be good for others and good for you. Or at least they don't harm without a meaning. Now, what does that mean? If I make a sacrifice, that can be a good choice, even though it causes, arguably, some harm to me. But it's not doing something harmful to me for no reason. Contrast that with something that is harmful but is good for others. And that might be something like working myself to exhaustion, which in many cases is not really a sacrifice, it's just a bad choice. But if something is good for others and it's good for me, it is frequently a good choice. That's one of the characteristics that can make up a good choice. Because if it's beneficial to me and to others, and it's not evil in another way, then it's probably a good choice. Most good choices are morally good, because things that are morally good tend to be mutually beneficial. That is, good choices by this metric tend to be morally good. But there is a little bit more to it. And we need to be careful that when we're making choices, that we make them morally good as well as good in terms of utility. Good choices, another facet of good choices, another thing that can be used as a benchmark, is that good choices tend to be more oriented toward our future selves than our current selves. For example, staying up late to play games can bring enjoyment in the moment, but it can be detrimental in the long run, in the future. It's harmful to a future version of yourself. Good choices are choices that are made honestly. choices that are not made honestly are often subject to some of the fallacies and faulty assumptions that we saw earlier. Good choices tend to be based on evidence, not based on emotion or those faulty assumptions that we talked about earlier. How do you know if your assumptions are faulty? Well, you look at the evidence. Having evidence to back up your choice is a good indication that it's probably valid. Bad choices tend to be based on emotion or ambition. Or desire. I'm making this choice because I want it to be the right choice, or I want this outcome, rather than because it is objectively a good choice. There are going to be things that we don't know, and those can lead to using some assumptions that are false. But having a false assumption is not the same as having a faulty assumption. A false assumption turns out not to be correct, but a faulty assumption is not based on sound reasoning. So there are things we don't know, but our assumptions don't have to be faulty, even if they turn out to be false. As I said, faultiness is based on the foundation, not on the outcome. We can tell another thing that can help us find good choices is that good choices tend to seek a good third option when the options that are presented to us are harmful, evil, or have an unreasonable cost. A good choice, when faced with a predatory lender will look for another option because it will see that the costs are unreasonable. We see this also in the narrative that relates the events where Solomon was approached by two women, and the one said that her roommate had been delivered of a child at roughly the same time she was, and that her roommate had rolled over in the night and smothered her own child, and then taken the woman's child while she slept. And of course the other woman said that it was the other way around. That's why the case came to Solomon. And what he did was he used a bit of psychological testing to determine which of the women was the real mother, because it would have been an unacceptable solution to choose one over the other when he didn't know what situation had really happened. He looked for a third way, and he was able to use that to determine what the truth was. When we look for good choices, we need to do the same. We need to find a third way to look at the problem and to find a solution. That is not restricted by the options that were offered to us. So that's how to make good choices in most situations. But what happens when you come to a situation where there's an empire that needs to fall, as I mentioned before, or there's an abuser who needs to be removed? Well, there's a few guidelines we can use to make good choices in those situations too. Look for the greater good. Now, the greater good is often misused. It's often used to justify evil by saying that some greater good will come out of it. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is not an excuse to pursue an evil goal or to choose when the situation does not absolutely demand it to harm someone so that others may benefit. Now, I'm talking about those times where no choice exists that does not harm someone. And in those situations, we need to look for the greater good. What is the choice that brings about the greatest good when hard choices need to be made. It's a barometer rather than excuse. It tells you how good the means that you're contemplating are. It's the best choice when there's no choice available that will not harm someone. That's what the greater good is. Another benchmark that we can use when looking at choices that may result in some harm is to protect those who cannot protect themselves. I'm talking about capacity to protect themselves, not willingness, or not willingness alone. A child cannot protect themselves they can't defend against an adult with experience. An animal cannot protect itself against a human being who is larger and stronger in many cases, especially things like domesticated dogs. But I'm not talking about people who are merely unwilling to take their own part against someone that they are capable of defending against. Someone that they have the ability to overcome. We need to be very careful about that. Because while we can keep people safe from a lot of things, we can also end up keeping them from ever becoming truly free by continually protecting them from every emotional damage. Consider the message of Asimov's I, Robot. The book teaches that the problem with the three laws, and there was a problem, and that was the point of the book. Problem with the three laws is that it attempted to provide absolute safety. It was trying to make everything completely safe. And that is not an environment in which beings grow stronger. Rather, they become more dependent. Which makes them weaker. And causes them to lose the ability to provide for themselves. So look for the choices that cause no injury without a great benefit. This is a hard line to find. Because what constitutes a greater benefit? It's a hard line to find. But the benefits to our psyche and to our society of taking the time and making the effort to find this balance, this tipping point, are immense. Look for the means of achieving whatever the goal is, whatever the protection is. Look for the means of achieving that with the least harm, the means that will cause the least harm. Are probably the good choices. Don't use a cannon to kill a fly. And don't punish people beyond what helps to right the wrong, what helps to reform the guilty, and beyond what makes sense. Use a proportional response. This helps with the next thing on my list, which is keep the harm focused on the guilty. Keep necessary harm focused on the guilty. So keep the necessary harm focused on the guilty wherever that's possible. In other words, minimize the splash damage. When you have to cause harm, try to minimize the splash damage. Protect those who are non-combatants so that you don't create another problem trying to solve this one. In addition, keep looking for ways to accomplish progress without any harm at all. It may not be possible, but it's definitely something that we should be striving for. Join me next time when I'll discuss a little bit about one of the bad decisions that is being made more and more often these days. I'll see you then.